Hello, everybody, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Jose.
I'm Mike.
And we've just come back from seeing Searching, which is another of those desktop films in which the narrative is told almost entirely through what you see on a desktop, or what can be seen through a desktop. A computer desktop.
Yeah, if you heard our podcast on Unfriended Dark Web from a few weeks ago, then you'll be familiar with the idea, and it's probably worth listening to that. It's certainly an interesting point of comparison to this. That was a horror movie. This is a thriller.
Yes.
And this is not as it's interesting in comparison with Unfriended. We'll get into the specifics, but this has a more free approach to its desktop aesthetic, whereas actually Unfriended was rather more rigid. But we'll come on to that. So this is a story told through computer desktops, through Skype, through messages, through the internet,
through surveillance cameras and so on. But really kind of everything mediated through media itself, but actually most specifically through media that is then available or enabled or diffused through a desktop computer, through a computer screen.
Yeah.
Which I find very interesting. I also think it's worth commenting that both of those films were produced by Timur Bekmambetov, yeah?
Yeah, a Russo-Kazakh producer.
Yes, I really like his films. I mean, he had that whole thing with the bullet curving, yeah, that kind of...
Oh, in Wanted.
I think it was one in Wanted, and also in Salt, I think. There's a couple of films that he did where I thought that was amazing, the way that he shot those bullets. This is nothing like that.
Did he direct those?
Yeah, he did direct those.
Okay. He just produces on
And
these.
he just produced these. But I just think it's so interesting to have his name attached to what I think are two low-budget but really intriguing and interesting exercises in narrative and kind of in visual storytelling. Yeah, kind of using... all that a social media world makes possible to tell the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was reading that the director of this, Anish Chaganty, who is Indian American. This is his first feature. He's made a few shorts. He was working with Google for a long time. He apparently pitched this as just like an 8-minute short, and it was the producers who told him, "No, we reckon this can be a feature length." And I think it's probably on the basis of 8 would be quite cheap, but also on the basis of them having done the first Unfriended a few years ago, probably gave them the confidence to say, we think this can be bigger.
Was Unfriended a few years ago? We just saw it.
No, the first Unfriended.
Oh, the first Unfriended. Yes,
yeah,
of course.
Dark Web was the sequel.
Yeah.
I had some problems with it at the start, but there was an element of getting used to it and getting used to the slightly different style that this film uses. But it really worked on me by the end. Yeah, it really, really worked on me. Once I got back, the opening, there's an opening where you get to know this family, this Korean-American family. The father is played by John Cho. And you get to know them through... it's almost like the beginning of Up, where, you see a very happy family... And then they go through, the mother has lymphoma, and then it goes into remission, then it comes back, and eventually she passes away. And then the film kind of comes, because it starts off with on Windows XP, and you see all these videos of like the daughter's piano recitals, and you see the calendar being used in like first day of school, first day of the next whatever, high school or whatever, and it's you see this kind of life of a family in fast forward. Until the mother dies, and then you get to, so the girl's 16 years old now, and the mother has passed away several years ago. Now we're in 2017, and she's on a Mac. And that whole opening was the first thing that I picked up on was that it was really editing what you were seeing in a way that Unfriended Dark Web didn't. As I recall, Unfriended Dark Web took a very, very rigid approach to we are showing you the entire screen in its entirety and not cutting away and not zooming in, not doing anything like that. So it's really up to the way we arrange things on the screen as to where how we kind of draw your focus, and it made it very realistic. Also, the fact that in Unfriended, the action was taking place in real time. It took place in that whole evening. You see it in real time, and in this, they're telling a story. Well, at the start, they're telling a story over 10 years or so, and then obviously it's a few weeks that the main plot takes place over a few weeks.
I love the beginning, and actually I love that economy. I love the way that it was using, social media to actually tell you a whole trajectory of a person's life almost in like 5 minutes, really. And it created a world and a set of relationships, all and a set of symbols almost, kind of, very economically, kind of through cutting all of that very quickly. It was like, I thought that was, to me, dazzling, actually.
Fair enough. I felt like I'd sort of seen it before, and I thought that the opening to this film was like a promo. Actually, you could sort of, having since found out that the director has worked doing promos and things for Google for a little while, that makes some sense, because there is a real slickness that makes it feel like a TV advert almost, or or the way that things move around not so realistically. The way that images are kind of much higher resolution than they would naturally be, because they have kind of movie production values behind them. There's an element of slickness and high production value to it, which made it feel just a little. I had to get used to it, and in a way, it's rather like when I saw Concussion, the Will Smith film, and it was only when I saw Concussion, which is a perfectly normal guy reveals a big secret type film and fights the guys in power, that I realised what Spotlight did that was so good, because Spotlight, I'm not going to go into it, but Spotlight basically was undercutting so much of what that kind of film normally does, but I didn't see it until I watched Concussion.
Sure. And
Concussion made me realise, oh, that's how it's normally done.
Right.
This is why Spotlight is different. And in this case, watching the opening of this made me realise just how good Unfriended Dark Web was.
Wow.
in the solidity of what it was doing and the believability of absolutely everything, because this was taking movie-ish sort of shortcuts, or not shortcuts, but just stylistic things.
We feel differently about that, because one of the things that I welcome in this use of social media is actually using everything that we recognize as part of the world that we live in as kind of storytelling elements. They're bits of information, and not just bits of information, but actually whole human relationships and social relationships that are embodied in social media and the way that we use it, right, that are part of the world that we live in, and therefore should be, it's part of like a language, really. So it's right that it be used in audiovisual storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I often don't like, or I see it as a self-imposed kind of limitation, is when they turn it into a formal exercise only, right? And actually, I thought that was a problem with this film as well.
Okay.
So I think what you didn't like about the film is what I really like, that you have this world and the series of relationships and these people, and and you get so much information on them so economically, like at the beginning. I just thought that was to me narratively dazzling.
Right? It wasn't that I didn't like that. I think I really liked what it was trying to do, but the fact that it felt like like I say, like something that I'd seen before, and like a very slickly produced TV advert, was a little bit disappointing to me. But then once I realised, and once I learned that the film was, it's what it seemed to me was that it was exposing the limitations of this type of filmmaking. And what I came to realise over the rest of the film is that actually, once you're into it, it allows you to tell a different type of story. The fact is that Unfriended was able to use its rigid format because it was telling such a rigid story. It was happening all in real time over one night, and it was all happening on one computer. And in this, different devices are used. So there's an old computer which uses Windows XP. There's a new computer which is a Mac.
I thought that was interesting.
There's a smartphone. There's a few other things. So it's not as rigid as Unfriended. And I realised that this film is using it really, really well, and it is making those sort of sacrifices, I suppose, for a greater good.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah. Let's tell the plot, because otherwise we're going to end up losing people, really.
Yeah, sure, okay. So the plot is that John Cho is the father. He loses his wife. His daughter is getting old. His daughter's 16 by this point. She goes out to a study group with her friends for AP biology, I think, and she doesn't come back. The dad misses a couple of phone calls, then kind of starts to get worried that she's not coming back. Starts to try and get in touch with her friends, realizes that he doesn't really know her, and so he has to try and log into the old computer and find all this stuff. Basically, start digging. He becomes a kind of vigilante detective, trying to work out where his daughter is and what's happened. And he starts learning that he doesn't really know his daughter very much at all, and she is declared missing. And then he starts working with a detective who's played by Deborah Messing.
Yes.
To find her. They speak a lot over FaceTime, so that's how you get to see them.
Yes. I mean,
I'd say spoilers from now on, yeah?
Yeah, let's say spoilers from now on. I really loved the film, but what I didn't like about it was that it was all mediated, that every element of it was through a desktop, through a screen, right? And that they cheated. So, for example, so the formal exercise in a way wasn't carried all the way through. So there was a lot of television coverage, right? That they weren't showing through television; they were actually showing it through a computer screen. Right?
Yeah, well, through streams on news websites.
Exactly, which I thought, that felt a little bit phony to me.
I can certainly agree with you to an extent. There is an element of this film. Did you see the film Chronicle?
No.
The film Chronicle was really disappointing, and it was another it was real found footage. Like this is desktop, and that was found footage in that it was all done on video camera. But it had this thing. It was these kids learning superpowers and flying around and stuff. And there was a thing in that film of every moment it was trying to make you aware of why the camera was there filming this, in a way that like Unfriended didn't have that problem at all. And this film had it a little bit when it was trying to justify why it was showing news footage or why it was showing kind of Google Maps or something. It had moments where it was trying to justify too heavily why you were seeing what you were seeing.
Yes.
And for instance, when you're seeing news footage being shown through the website, it's not so much that that's unrealistic because that's how news websites work, but you kind of question who's watching this.
Yes.
Yeah. Who's like there are points where it's very obvious that John Cho's character is using the computer for this, that, and the other. But there are points where you're going, this is just being shown to me through a website because it fits the aesthetic, and actually no one's really behind this.
Yes.
So it does kind of cheat. I
didn't like that, and I also didn't like because it also cheats when Deborah Messing's in jail being questioned. Yeah. And then you think, well, where's this coming from? And where's the video monitor for this? Because that didn't seem to come through any video monitor. It was like directly from the camera, right?
It does pull back and show you that it is a QuickTime video that's being played on the Mac. The question then is, why the hell has he been sent this footage from the prison? That's silly.
Yeah. So and I just think that in both instances, though, I think it's lovely that there's this kind of experimentation with form, and you always have to set restraints on kind of these formal experiments and so on, right? So I'm not questioning, and actually I like the film very much, and and I think it's kind of formally thrilling to see what kind of people are doing. But I also think that filmmakers are missing an opportunity, right? Because you get so stuck in this formal exercise that actually you miss a dimension of character and people and situation. I mean, why not cut onto the film's diegetic real world? Why is everything kind of mediated through screen? Unless kind of you're making a systematic kind of thought through point about it, which I don't think this film is particularly. I mean, it is to a point, yeah, but there's no need. So, for example, the scene where the father is questioning the brother. I think that scene would have been so much more dynamic and interesting if it had cut, from the real diegetic world onto the mediated footage, back again, right? And actually you show people looking at the screens, right? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems that, you know, to be too rigid about you know, the sticking to that formal thing also loses out on potentials of point of view, of textures, on narrative, you know, situations between what is and what's seen, right? There's all kinds of elements that could be at play that aren't.
I think it certainly doesn't serve this film as well as it serves Unfriended, and I think you're right that it would be a very different film if they were, you know, also filming quote unquote like a real movie, you know. But I can certainly imagine a version of that which would be more interesting than this, or better realised.
Yes.
As you say, there are issues with it having to fudge the edges to just get, like for instance, when you're shown that footage of Deborah Messing being questioned in prison, and that's basically when she explains everything that happened. The reason that you're being shown that is because that is just the easiest and clearest and best way to explain all the details of what's happened. But you're right that, like, in order to have that exposition, it does make the sacrifice of believability at that point.
But also, it means that the film has to tell and not show. Yeah, which is, I think, another problem, right? Like, you're told a lot of narrative, because actually the restrictions of the form means that you can't show it in a kind of a dynamic and interesting way.
Yeah, kind of. But it is the case that most of the narrative really is about John Cho on the hunt.
Sure.
And he conducts that search through the internet.
Yes.
And through searching on the computers for like old passwords and old lists of friends.
No,
and
I
that
think
sort
all
of thing.
that's great.
So like that is clearly where like the detective search is built around the use of the computer.
Sure.
And even when he goes to, he only really does one thing in sort of quote unquote the field, which is when he goes to the lake, having figured out that that's where his daughter went. Yeah. And even then, you know, he's on FaceTime with the detective saying, "Why the hell aren't you here?" No, so it's done. It all is done through the computer, and it is built into the plot.
I would argue that, you know, and this is a very good film, so don't get me wrong. Yeah, but, you know, just within the context that it is a very good film, I think certain things would have been better without their being mediated through computer screens. For example, there are scenes where it seems completely artificial. You know, the scene where the father goes to the lake to see, you know, whether his daughter is in the car that they now know is in the lake, right? Why does that have to be mediated through television?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean,
there's no computer search on at the moment for that scene. Likewise, the scene where they actually find her in the ravine. You know, why does that have to be mediated through a kind of a news report? It doesn't add anything.
I agree, and that's where the idea of taking the film into the film's real world and out of the computer screen would be beneficial.
Yes.
But I certainly think that for the majority of the search, it taking place as a desktop film makes perfect sense.
Sure,
I didn't question that.
I agree.
It's true that once they start introducing so much kind of news footage, it does feel like they're doing it because they've said from the start, this is the film we're making and we can't budge from that. But actually, I mean, imagine if the film, like for the first 45 minutes, was all the desktop film and then it came into the real world. You'd have to take a minute to adjust because that wasn't what you were expecting.
But it
might be better. And exactly.
And actually, you know, it's because during the screening, quite a lot of people walked out. I noticed about 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, I do think that if you're not computer literate, which I imagine still quite a large percentage of a cinema-going audience would be, the film can look very dull.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is a risk that you take with this kind of film, I think. I mean, it would be probably even more so the case with Unfriended, which is not only a desktop film, but it's also about a group of people who, if you're the kind of person who doesn't really know much about computers, you probably have nothing to connect with those kids over.
Oh, yeah.
You know, whereas this at least is about a father-daughter relationship and the search, and it's a much more relatable kind of story, I think.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the terminology, because we're trying to find the language through which to talk about these films, and you deployed several terms. So, you know, on the one hand, kind of there's like found footage films, and we've been calling them desktop films. And then I think critically there's another term that's being bandied about, which is...
I don't know about critically, but one of the production companies behind this, Basilev's company, which is a company that Timur Bekmambetov founded, on their Wikipedia page, this genre is referred to as screen life.
Screen life. Okay.
Screen life. That's the only place that I've seen that term. So I don't know if it's like an in-house term or term they're trying to popularize. But that's a kind of... That's an interesting one because it expands the idea of it being a desktop film to include other forms of screens.
Yes.
Like you do. So this isn't strictly on the desktop. You also see at one point... you see at a few points smartphone footage where it does the classic thing of having huge black borders off to the left and right hand sides because it's in portrait mode. So the whole cinema screen is just portrait mode at that point. So, because as I say, that's where this film takes kind of liberties where the Unfriended didn't.
Yes. So what's the term again? Screen
life.
Screen life.
Ding.
I think that's an interesting term because I think the film would be more interesting if they expanded that sense of screen life. But then it also makes sense then, like for example, the interrogation scene, it makes sense if they think of it as screen life rather than desktop or computer screen.
Yeah.
So I think those are interesting. Anyway, I'm very intrigued by these exercises, and I must say that I found the film, on the one hand, I was very taken by the mystery of it. So the film is really a film about a man doing online research through which to find his daughter who's disappeared. It really is all about research in a way, right? And kind of but research in a way that's relatable. So a lot of the things about he goes into his daughter's laptop, and then obviously she's got all these passwords, and then how to get through the passwords.
Yeah, there's a daisy chain of he tries to get into her Facebook, and he goes reset password because he doesn't know it, and so then it goes, okay, we've sent a resetted password to Google Gmail, so he goes to Gmail, and then he can't get into Gmail, so then he has to send a password back to Yahoo, which he's able to get into. So like it makes a joke out of this daisy chain of always forgetting your password, or in this case trying to get into someone else's email.
Yes.
But again, like as you say, it's totally relatable. Everyone's been there.
It happens to me about my passwords much less anybody else. Right. So that was interesting, and also the amount of information that you can get, and people using false identities, right? So it touches on thematic strands that are very live and very current, and with us in the news.
Yeah, well, I wanted to pick up on this. I mean, there's her school. You see right at the start, it says such and such high school, home of the catfish, and catfish is a term which it comes from the film Catfish and has entered popular usage as a term for spoilers if you haven't seen Catfish, by the way, but this is why the term is popular. It's a term for pretending to be someone else online,
right? And
I noticed that right at the start, and I thought, well, this is going to come into the film, and then I'd forgotten about it when it turns out that someone has been pretending to be someone online. I'm like, fuck, I knew it.
Exactly. Pick up on that at all.
It is right there. There's because I think it's we've been talking about what is flawed about the film's approach to its style, but there are some really positive things about it as well. And one of those things, as you say, the relatability of the way in which we use computers and the internet is one thing. Also, the culture clash of an older person not understanding their kid.
Yes.
Because John Cho, he looks at his daughter's most visited websites. There's a list of them in Google Chrome, and one of them is this You Share It website, something like that. You stream, Ucast it's called.
Yes.
And he goes to it, and it's alien to him. It's like a YouTube type thing, but it's just kids live streaming themselves in their rooms or on the street or whatever, and getting like a bunch of other people just sitting there typing to them saying, what's your favourite Pokemon, or whatever, or I like your hair. And it's weird to him, and he doesn't understand it, and he clicks, he starts live streaming, and he's just like, what? I don't understand this.
Yes.
And clicks away, and it's only when he clicks away that he realises that this thing comes up saying, do you want to save this cast? Do you want to see all your other saved casts? He looks at them, and then he finds this whole repository of casts that his daughter's been doing, that he knew nothing about, and she's been putting her life online, and kind of expressing herself to these strangers, and so there's this. It's partly this thing of he didn't know his daughter. She didn't seem to have any friends, but she's been able to connect with all these people online. One person in particular. So it does this. It does that thing of not knowing your daughter, combines it with the idea of not knowing how to use what your daughter is using. You know, and it's always particularly with technology. It's happened more and more over the last few decades, I guess. Parents being really behind and not being able to understand, you know, what their kids are doing. It felt really real to me, and it spoke to sort of it made it more than a gimmick. It made it more than a gimmick because it expressed how all these things are tied together. These kind of relationships and the way that barriers spring up, and the idea that if you're not paying attention, you get completely left behind, and probably even if you are paying attention, you still will anyway because you're just too old to get it.
Yes, I mean, for me, the thing is that it represented Tumblr and Facebook and Ucast and Instagram in ways that are actually recognizably, so there was this moment where he's looking through Instagram and he realizes how lonely his daughter was.
Yes.
Yeah, in a way that felt like really recognizable to me. So all of the pictures that she was posting were all like raindrops, landscapes, right?
Yeah.
Her feet, like there were never any other people in so it made me realize that kind of it's not just that these social media kind of are used for different things, but that they also signify, we've learned to read them in very particular ways. So actually just reading, you know, and the father understood that, right? So just looking at the photographs that she had posted already told you about, you know, that person's state of mind in a way that was instantly legible.
Yeah. Because there's this aspect of he thinks that she's got loads and loads of friends.
Yes.
And then when he speaks to them, and says, "Where is she? What do you know about her?" It turns out that none of them really know her at all.
Yes.
And that's his first kind of clue, really, that he doesn't know his daughter.
Yeah. That was, and so there's that wonderful moment as well, which is like a critique of people's behavior on social media, which is, you know, where he questions one of the girls, and she says, "Oh, I barely knew her. I just want to get into Berkeley." So basically, you know, this girl's using his daughter to be good at math, kind of, you know, typical kind of Asian cliche. But anyway, then the girl is kidnapped, and it was like, you know, everybody who barely knew her before, "Oh, she's my best friend, I'm going to die, I can't bear it."
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, all of those kinds of things that we're all so used to. The changing responses on Facebook that are an absolute cliche, that we've seen them a million times in real life. The film satirizes that or dramatizes that. I mean, it's partly satire, but it's partly just dramatizing it.
Yeah, and it's partly just observational comedy.
Yeah, you know, it does it really well.
It's got a good sense of that. It occurred to me from the moment the film started that it was interesting that it was about a Korean American family. And just on the basis of how many times do you see Korean or East Asian American families coming in, like, you know, the Americans use the word Asian to mean sort of Oriental, whereas in the UK we use the word Asian to mean Indian. Yeah. Actually, this film kind of incorporates both because the director is Indian, writer-director is Indian, and the family represented is Korean. But I suppose it occurs to me partly because John Cho is such a recognisable face, but he's always playing second fiddle to someone.
Yes.
You know, when has he ever really been? He was the lead in Harold and Kumar, those films. He shared the lead with an Indian actor. What's his name? Cal Penn. Which, you know, I didn't like those films that much, but it's notable for that reason, I suppose. That it's an Indian and Korean actor sharing the limelight.
Yes. I mean, it's very. We were talking earlier about it. It is very remarkable that this seems to be the first Hollywood film we can think of with, what Americans call an Asian lead. Somebody of, Thai or Japanese or Chinese or Korean.
It's certainly one
origin.
of them. There is also this film Crazy Rich Asians.
Well, that's not come out here
It's
yet.
just coming out, so that's another one. But it's certainly true to say it's very rare.
It's very rare. And what I was going to say is, we were talking about how it's the first one that comes to mind. And then, of course, you think of, the Charlie Chan films or whatever. But actually, that was people, that was like Peter Lorre and, so white stars putting on the tape around their eyelids and pretending to be Chinese or Japanese. So there were lots of people like that. And then, of course, there were, in the silent period, actual superstars, really. Like Setsu Hayakawa was an international kind of star, who starred in his own films. And Anna May Wong, of course, is like really famously the star of Piccadilly and films like that. So there was a period in kind of in silent cinema in the 20s where you did have these Chinese or Japanese kind of superstar actors from Hollywood, working in Hollywood. But since then, I can't think of one.
Well, probably the biggest example would be Jackie Chan, who is huge.
Of course.
But
that's true.
The mitigating factor with Jackie Chan is that his English is really no good. He always has to be paired up with an American actor, basically.
Yeah. So let's be more precise. This is the first film we can think of where, someone playing the lead as an American, so he's just kind of an ordinary American, is actually played by someone of Korean origin. It's just the first one we can think of. I mean, there are probably a lot more, but because it's the first one we can think of, it's very significant, I think.
And I think it's definitely the case that when actors of Asian origin, either Asian, get roles, they are always backup characters.
Yes.
And like I say, that's how John Cho's kind of made his name. He made his name really. He was first recognisable as the guy who said MILF in American Pie, and that's the reason that we have the word MILF these days, is thanks to John Cho.
I still don't know what it means. What does it
MILF.
mean?
It means mother I'd like to fuck.
Oh, right, okay.
Thanks for making me say it.
I had known it at some point, but I forgot.
Yeah, well, he was, because Stifler's mom was a MILF.
Yes.
And so he said that 20 years ago, and it exploded.
Oh my God.
And then I suppose more recently, what you'd recognise him from is Star Trek, where he plays Sulu.
Yes.
Who is a backup character in Star Trek. Let's be honest.
Yes.
He doesn't ever really do anything important in the new Star Treks.
Yes.
As I recall.
Yes. I mean, it's.
And he's been a character actor on TV and things like that.
I find it noteworthy.
Yeah, it is.
Right, because it is also a bit of blind casting in the sense that it could these are roles that could easily have been cast in a WASP family, right? Like
no, exactly.
So,
this is why it occurred to me. Like there's nothing made of the fact that they're Korean.
Yeah,
they are just
American.
Yeah, and as you say, they could be white, they could be black, they could be of any sort of any race or ethnic background. They just happen to be a Korean American family.
Yes. And
they're not treated in any particular way because of that.
Yeah.
I think that's.
I mean, they're not recent immigrants. They're not. It's kind of. It's just. And I thought that was kind of worth underlining. It's noteworthy.
Yeah, it is.
I'd like to see more of it, really.
Yeah. And it's also worth saying that John Cho is just fucking brilliant in this.
Yes.
I think he's really, really good. He nails every aspect of his kind of desperation, and his desperation in search for his daughter, and then his confusion and sort of anger and resignation that he doesn't know her as well as he thought he did.
Yes.
It's a really nuanced performance. I mean, it's luckily we get to see lots of it because the FaceTime is always on. So
yes. I mean, I thought it was and it's also a very, I mean, I suppose if it were a woman, you'd say courageous, in the sense that, uh, phone cameras can be very cruel, right? And you see his age and so on, but it all works for the character, and he's brilliant. And I think he makes Deborah Messing look bad. Yeah. She's not up to, the complexities and the nuances, and, she's not up to his performance.
No,
Her performance
that's
is
probably
not up
true.
to hers.
Yeah. I think she has less to express, and I think she is decent. I particularly like the press conferences that she gave. I thought they
Well, to me, she's a lesson that, being filmed harshly and wearing no makeup does not add up to a good performance.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, because, she does all of that, and, she allows herself to be seen just coming out of bed, and, and she's very harshly lit. You can see all her pimples on the side of her face and so on. But actually, she's still not giving a very nuanced performance. I mean, she's giving kind of almost like a TV movie performance in a film, really. It's completely one-dimensional throughout. So it works on a certain level, but she doesn't bring the complexities that he does, really.
No, I suppose not. But he is really good. And I think the film, once I got used to the way it was zooming in on parts of the screen and cutting back and forth and moving around, which initially I didn't like. Once I get used to that, I felt it really worked. Like it's how the film is directing your attention and making things important and that sort of thing. And it's also the way it allows it to cut across time periods, because it has to tell this story over a few weeks.
Yes.
So it would probably be weird doing that if they were being kind of really rigid in one sense, in that visual sense. Once I got used to that, I thought it was really good, and it really, really worked on me. And there were points where I was getting genuinely worried, like when the kind of search starts for the daughter and the press conferences are happening, I was getting really, really worried, thinking, are they going to find her? What's going to happen? And when it's suggested that she's dead, you think that she's dead at one point, I thought, no, I can't believe this, actually. Like, it would make sense in Unfriended, because that film is dark and dingy and horror, and this film is not that. This film, it would be so cruel in this film to kill the girl.
Yes.
And I felt like, even though I'm the kind of person who really wants stupid shit to happen in movies, I felt like, no, I don't want that to happen in this, because it doesn't fit the film, and actually I want the families to be reunited and that sort of thing. I didn't want that kind of cruelty. But the fact that the film was making me believe that it could have happened, I felt horrible, man. It worked on me.
It did. It worked on me as well, and I was moved at the end. Before we wrap up, kind of, what do you take to be the film's main themes? So for me, the first thing obviously is an intergenerational thing. It's, how little parents really know about their children, and why that might be a concern, right? Both, on an interpersonal level and on a social level, right? That's kind of one of the things the film works through, I think, kind of very well. The other is obviously the mediated world we live in, right? And how so much of our personal life and our friendships and courtships and so on are kind of done through social media that has its own particular codes and languages, and where it has to be read because everything is not as it seems. So I think that's kind of one of the things that the film kind of arguably makes even much more than I'm making of it, because every image that we are shown is mediated. We always see through kind of
a
screen in a way that normally a normal movie tries to hide the existence of the camera, or it tries to say this is the real world of this story, at least, right? Whereas this one is telling you, this is not the real world of this story. This is the world as mediated through screens, right? Yeah. So, which is a very different thing.
Yeah. I think if you imagine what the film could have been if it was trying to do something different, I think what the film is not doing is trying to use that as a kind of warning. What you'll very often see, I think, and what you might expect is for a film to be saying like, you know, oh, it's dangerous to be putting this much of yourself online, and using it as a warning. But actually, in this film, I mean, the fact that the girl has put herself online in this way, put her life online, and in one way leads to what happens to her and her disappearance. But also, it's like it's the way in which she can express herself, and that is recognised by the film, and it's what saves her because that's where all this information comes from. Yeah. That leads them to her. And what not only leads them to her, but also leads to the arrest of Deborah Messing's character, because John Cho figures out that she is in a way behind this.
Yes.
So that it's a very positive thing, and actually, what it is really is just observational. Like, it has that observation of the intergenerational conflict of not understanding what kids are up to these days. You know, John Cho's character has a certain level of knowledge about how to use the internet and what goes on in it, but when it comes to UCAST, he's lost, and he's just learning something for the first time, and that sort of thing. And as I say, it relates that really nicely to the idea of not understanding your kids. I think that the loss of the mother is a trope the film could have done without. You may have heard the phrase "woman in the fridge," which is I think it comes from comics. I think it's from Barbara Gordon,
right?
The character Barbara Gordon from Batman.
Yeah.
She winds up in a fridge one day, and that becomes because didn't Batman love her or something, and so Batman's motivation becomes, I'm going to get you because of what you did to Barbara. Right. And this trope of a woman dying, particularly early on in a film or story of any kind, then becoming a different character's motivation, normally a man's, is this trope that it's not to say that it's illegitimate to use it at all. Like, it's a perfectly fine motivation, but it's a crutch. People use it a lot more than they should, and this film uses it, and not even really for that purpose so much. It's the drama that it tries to generate around the loss of the mother and the fact that the girl was much better friends with the mother than the father, and there's this distance between them. I think the film doesn't make enough of, and it means that the use of the trope comes across as slightly icky because it didn't seem necessary to me.
I didn't feel that. I don't agree. I mean, I thought, kind of, well, first of all, kind of women dying early of cancer is, something that's in the media a lot if they go undiagnosed, right? So it has a certain logic. Then actually him suffering through widowhood or widowerhood, and thus kind of, not quite knowing how to interact or not quite knowing how to do, and, being involved in his own grief, trying to do his best for the daughter, but kind of, so they're both dealing with a certain kind of loss that they can't communicate to each other. I think that's a wonderful basis for the film, and kind of, gives it a certain resonance.
No, that's fair enough, I suppose. I mean, it wouldn't work the same way without it, I suppose.
Yes, it would be a different movie.
It would be a different movie,
yeah,
and it's true that sense of loss and the sense of the lack of connection between them, the fact that actually if they just talked about it, they'd be much healthier, and this would never happen or something. That's true. That is there. I guess it's just the start of the film. Maybe, I'm nitpicking, I suppose. It did have a slightly icky feel. The fact that the mother gets cancer and dies, I'm not saying there's like no logic to it. It's whenever this trope is used, it's always perfectly sensible. It's just that it's used so often that it's clearly a crutch sometimes.
Yes, but
I appreciate that actually there is purpose to it here beyond what I was seeing.
Yes, and it's not a woman in the fridge situation, in a way, because I presume that a woman in a fridge situation is the motivation for action, as you say, but then the woman can come out of the fridge, right? Like,
No. I mean, she's dead in the fridge.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, no, she's Barbara Gordon is totally
well,
dead.
I think this is much more than that. Really.
Yeah, it is better than that. That's true.
So anyway,
but having said that, now that I've mentioned it, you will start seeing it everywhere.
So let's wrap up. I mean, I think this is a really interesting exercise in narrative. I actually kind of, found that it offered so much to think about. And it was very interesting, and at the end I found it moving as well.
Yeah.
So I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, so would I. Moving is the word. Once I got used to that difference between it and Unfriended, and the fact that like I say, it made me realise what Unfriended was doing that was so good. But the differences that this film had formally really works in its favour for the most part. But it is interesting to imagine what the film could have been had they gone that one step further and taken it into the real world a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's the next step for this kind of movie. Like, the formal rigidity of keeping it on the desktop all the time.
Well, it's almost
you're not to its advantage.
Yes. Why limit yourself when you have all these other tools that can make a film richer, that could give it another dimension. I think that's the problem with some of these formal exercises, that they often don't. They're often just that, exercises, right? Whereas films can do so much more. Now, that said, I think this is a really interesting film and very much worth seeing.
Yes.
So, we are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on iTunes, SoundCloud, Facebook, YouTube, and WordPress.
Twitter.
And Twitter. Damn. There's always one. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
Do drop us a line if there's something that intrigued you or that you disagree with and that you'd like us to elaborate on. Goodbye.
Ciao.
All right. Let's go.